the Sacred Deer is the new film by Greek director Yorgos Lanthimos, who I like to describe as the demon baby from Wes Anderson and Lars von Trier. It stars Colin, Farrell, Nicole, Kidman, has a very strange cameo by Alicia Silverstone, whom I haven't really seen in a while. And if you've seen Dunkirk, you'll recognize Barry Keoghan, or I'm not really sure how you pronounce his name. The film is a modern retelling of the Iphigenia story from Greek mythology, and if, like me, you need a brush up on Greek mythology, Iphigenia was the eldest daughter of King Agamemnon. While Agamemnon was on a hunting trip, he killed a sacred deer that belonged to the goddess Artemis. And when he was about to sail for Troy to go to war, he had to, in turn, sacrifice his eldest daughter, Iphigenia, in order for the winds to be favorable and to appease the goddess, which he did. And if this sort of sounds like Stannis Baratheon's daughter storyline on Game of Thrones, I really don't think that's an accident. Colin Farrell plays a very successful heart surgeon, and he's regularly visited by a young man, Barry Keoghan, and at first we're not really sure what the relationship is between these two. At first it's pretty unclear. It seems like maybe he's an illegitimate son or something, but we later learn that he is in actuality the son of a patient that Colin Farrell had, who died on the operating table. And as the movie progresses, Barry Keoghan's character starts inserting himself more and more into the family life of Colin Farrell. While all this is happening, Colin Farrell's son suddenly loses the use of his legs. He can't walk anymore, and it's very quickly revealed by the young kid character himself, Barry Keoghan, again, that there is a curse that has been placed upon Colin Farrell and his family, that progressively all of his family members will start to lose their limbs, bleed from the eyes, and eventually die, unless he himself sacrifices one of his family members. I've been following this director since Dogtooth came out in 2009, and I'm pretty impressed with how he's evolved in terms of style and his technical abilities. You can definitely tell that it's a Yorgos Lanthimos film, but I generally would associate with his style super static, medium wide to wide shots that are extremely symmetrical. And in The Killing of a Sacred Deer, he really does evolve quite a bit. There are more close-ups, there's more camera movement, especially pans and tilts, and the film begins on a zoom out from a heart surgery. You're starting on this close-up of a beating heart, and the camera just progressively zooms out to reveal the setting in which the scene takes place. And of course, there are the multiple uses of dolly shots within the corridors of the hospital that sort of track the movements of the characters. All of this sort of contributes to give a very Kubrickian feel, at least in terms of style, and especially for the first half of the movie, I'd say. Obviously, you remember from The Shining the Steadicam shots that follow Danny when he's riding his tricycle in the corridors of the hotel, and there are some shots that tend to mimic that, like I said, during the hospital scenes especially. But in this case, the camera is placed way higher up and is tilted down towards the characters, which really contributes to this idea of fate looking down on our actors, of them being totally incapable of escaping their destiny. Where you know you're in a Lanthimos film, however, is when the dialogue kicks in. Every single line of dialogue is delivered with an extremely monotone voice, and every syllable seems to be overpronounced in an extreme way, to the point where, and this is the case in all his films, none of his characters actually feel human. They all feel like they're robots trying to pass off as human. This really contributes to a sense of isolation, a sense of alienation that both his characters and the spectator feels from their own interactions, from the world around them. His films tend to not really have any real characters. They're just archetypes that push the themes forward. And that leads us into one of the first major flaws of the movie. And that is when you don't really have any human characters, how do you handle violence, and especially violence towards children? I'm not a moralizer. I don't like to tell people what they can and can't do, but the way that Lanthimos uses threat of violence and violence towards kids in this film, I found absolutely abhorrent. When you deny any sort of humanity to your characters and then you harm a child, what you're doing is you're not actually making a good directorial choice. You're just trying to get a rise and a reaction out of your audience. And that's the easiest trick in the book. If I just suddenly insert a video of a puppy being shot in the face just randomly within the middle of the video, well, then you're gonna have a reaction from that. And that has nothing to do with how good or bad my directorial skills are. That just means that you're a halfway decent human being. And the use of violence towards particularly the young kid in this film is just that. It's just a puppy getting shot in the face, and I'm reacting to it because, yeah, of course it's shocking, but watching a kid getting prodded with needles, crawling on the ground because he can't walk, or just watching him getting repeatedly dropped by his father because his father refuses to accept that he can't walk anymore, that's not a smart directorial choice. That's just the director trying to get a rise out of me, and it works, but it's not it's a terrible directorial choice. And speaking of terrible choices, I move on to the screenplay. There's something that I really don't want to see in films anymore, and something that I think should be banned from screenplays, and that is when a character's psychology is intimately linked with his profession. If that's not very clear, I'll give the example that I found so egregious in this film. We already established that Colin Farrell is a heart surgeon, so he operates on inanimate, anesthetized bodies. So obviously his sex kink is that his wife lays on her back and doesn't move. I think she even calls it out, says something like full or general anesthetic. And so she just lays there while, presumably because we don't see the full extent of the scene, Colin Farrell just ravages Nicole Kidman's asshole. And I just find that extremely stupid. It's something that I would expect to see in a student film, not in the award winner for the best screenplay at Cannes. It is the most basic, high schoolish exploration into a character's psychology. By that logic, if he had been a teacher, would his sex thing be that he likes to dress his wife up like a little schoolgirl or something? I think it's absolutely incredibly stupid. So yes, the fact that this film is getting quite a bit of praise and won a prize at Cannes is absolutely baffling to me. That being said, it's not the worst film of the year. Like I explained in the first part of the review, I thought there were some really impressive technical abilities to the film. I just don't understand how a film that's so precise and proficient from a technical standpoint can be so immature in terms of just basic directing and screenwriting. But ultimately, the movie's biggest sin is that it just doesn't really work as satire. Dogtooth worked as satire. You can read more into it, as some people have done, and see it as a criticism of whatever Greek politics and the economic situation in Greece, but as a just pure, darkly humorous satire on overparenting and overprotecting your children, it really works. The Lobster, in this respect, was a complete failure. I thought that a film that pokes fun at the idea of the dictatorship of the couple, that if you're not in a couple, if you are single, then you are going to be transformed into an animal, holds no ground today when there has been no better time in terms of being single or it being accepted or whatever. And in this case, again, I feel that as satire, it just doesn't work. Sure, you want to criticize the bourgeoisie and the European elites that sacrificed Greece and the Greek people in the name of the European Union and in the name of capitalism, but that actual commentary in the film is extremely lacking and tenuous at best. And I'm sorry, but criticizing the bourgeoisie in your Cannes-selected film with superstar actors is just about the most bourgeois thing you can do.